A century ago, there was no fertilizer aisle, no sacks of chemicals, no bottles promising a greener lawn, and yet the gardens of that time were richer than ours. Their soil was darker, deeper, and more alive than ours today. Their crops grew strong without a single bag of fertilizer. So how did they do it without our products? They knew something we have quietly forgotten. They understood how to feed the soil itself, directly. It wasn't a secret formula, just working with the earth. And all that lost wisdom still works in your garden today. Today, you'll learn the forgotten secrets behind their incredible soil, and why the bag you buy may never match it. You'll see your own garden with much older, wiser eyes. Welcome back to What the Garden Knows, where your yard has been speaking, and we finally learned to listen. Let's begin with the single biggest difference between then and now. It's a complete change in how we think about growing anything. Today, the very moment a plant looks weak or pale, we reach straight for the fertilizer. We pour it on at once to feed that single plant directly, right then and there. It's a quick, concentrated chemical meal, delivered in an instant straight down to the roots. And for a week or two, the plant does look greener and happier. But that fertilizer only feeds the plant for a moment, while completely ignoring the soil itself. The gardeners of old did something almost exactly the opposite. They never once tried to feed the plant directly, not in the way we do at all. Instead, they put all their care into feeding the soil. They believed that if the soil was healthy, the plants would follow. And as it turns out, they were completely and absolutely right about that all along.
Rich, living soil feeds your plants slowly and steadily all season long. It holds on to water, stores up nutrients, and shelters all the living things that help them grow. A quick splash of fertilizer can never truly build any of that. In truth, it's a bit like the difference between a quick sugary snack and a proper nourishing meal. The snack gives a fast burst, then fades and leaves you hungry again. The real meal builds lasting strength that carries you for a long time. So their first and greatest secret was simply this: stop feeding the plant and start feeding the living soil beneath it. Get that one simple idea right, and almost everything else in the garden begins to follow naturally. And the clever ways they fed that soil are the real treasure here. Each one is simple, nearly free, and still works perfectly today. If your grandparents grew a garden, tell me about it in the comments, and consider subscribing, because this old wisdom deserves to be remembered. Here's the second secret, and it's one we've almost entirely lost. 100 years ago, almost nothing in the garden was ever wasted. Every single scrap and leftover, without exception, found its way quietly back into the earth. Vegetable peelings, used coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, and the old dried stalks of plants. Fallen leaves in autumn, grass clippings, and trimmings from the beds. All of it was gathered into a humble, steaming pile in the corner. There, slowly over many months, it all rotted down into dark, sweet, crumbly, rich compost. And that finished compost was then returned straight to the soil. It was a perfect, closed, unbroken circle, with the whole garden quietly feeding itself. What the garden gave, the gardener simply gave right back to it.
Nothing at all was ever thrown away, because to them, nothing was ever truly waste. Now compare that to how most of us tend our gardens today. We rake up the leaves and stuff them into bags by the curb. We bag the grass clippings and send them far away to the dump. And then, a little later, we drive to the store. We buy a sack of fertilizer to replace the very richness we threw out. When you really stop and think about it for a moment, there's a quietly strange irony in all of that. Our grandparents simply let nothing leave the garden in the first place, and their soil grew richer and darker with every single passing year. The third secret might make a modern gardener wrinkle their nose, because the great fertilizer of the old days was simply animal manure. Most households back then kept animals close to the home, perhaps a horse for the cart, a cow for fresh milk, and some chickens and rabbits. And every single one of those animals quietly produced something genuinely precious for the garden soil. Their manure was gold to a gardener who knew how to use it. It was absolutely packed with the very nutrients that hungry, growing plants love the most. But it gave the soil far more than just a dose of nutrients. It added rich organic matter that fed the living earth itself. It is one of the oldest and finest fertilizers humankind has ever known. Now, there is one important rule they always followed with it. They never used it fresh, straight from the animal, on their plants.
Fresh manure is far too strong and can burn tender roots, so they always let it age and quietly rot down for many long months fresh. Once well rotted, it turned dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling, and safe. Then it was worked gently into the beds to enrich them.
Today, you can still buy bags of well-aged manure for your garden. It remains one of the best gifts you can possibly give your soil. A simple, ancient secret that our grandparents grew up with and never even had to be taught. If this older way of gardening is starting to make sense, wonderful. Take a quick moment right now and tap that like button for me. It truly helps this forgotten wisdom reach more curious gardeners. The fourth secret feels almost like a quiet kind of magic, because these gardeners knew how to pull fertilizer right out of the air. And the humble helper that made it possible was simple clover. Clover belongs to a very special and clever family of plants known as the legumes. Peas, beans, and vetch are all members of that same clever family. These clever plants carry an extraordinary hidden partnership tucked away deep within their own roots. Tiny, helpful bacteria live in little nodules along those roots, and those tiny bacteria can do something truly remarkable that almost no plant can ever do alone. They pull nitrogen straight out of the air around us. Nitrogen is the one nutrient plants crave more than any other. It's the very same nitrogen sold in expensive bags today. But the humble clover and its bacteria gather it all for free, straight from the thin air. They store that nitrogen safely down in the soil around their roots. Old gardeners would grow a whole crop of clover on purpose. Then they would simply dig the green plants back into the earth. And as the green clover broke down, it slowly released all of that stored nitrogen into the soil. They called it green manure, a living fertilizer grown right in place. So instead of buying nitrogen, they quietly grew their very own. You can do the very same thing in any empty corner of your beds.
It remains one of the cleverest and most elegant tricks the old gardeners ever knew. So they fed the soil, composted everything, and grew their own fertilizer. But protecting all that hard-won richness was just as important to them. Stay with me, because this next secret quietly saved their soil. The fifth secret is one that modern gardeners break all the time. Old gardeners almost never left their bare soil exposed and uncovered. They understood that naked soil is soil in real danger. When the hot sun beats down day after day on bare earth, it bakes it hard, pale, and dry, and the precious living things within it slowly begin to wither, dry out, and fade away. And when heavy rain falls, it washes the rich topsoil clean away. And so year after year, that exposed soil grows steadily poorer, harder, and more tired. So the wise gardeners kept their soil covered, like a blanket. All through the growing season, they packed their beds completely full of healthy plants, and in the off-season, they sowed cover crops to hold the ground. Hardy crops like clover and rye gently blanketed the bare soil all through the cold winter months. When bare patches did appear, they spread a thick layer of mulch, straw, dead leaves, or old plant stalks laid gently over the earth. That cover kept the soil cool, moist, and safely shielded from harm. It fed the worms and slowly broke down into rich food below. Think of all that cover simply as a warm, protective blanket tucked snugly over the living soil. Bare soil loses its life, but covered soil quietly keeps building it. So look at your own beds and try never to leave them bare. Tuck your soil in, just as the old gardeners always did. The sixth secret is a simple habit that kept their soil from tiring.
It's the gentle art of moving your crops around each year. Imagine planting the very same vegetable in the very same spot, and you do it again, and then again, season after season after season after season. Each different type of plant feeds most heavily on its own certain handful of nutrients, so that one patch of soil is slowly drained of those exact nutrients, and before very long, the plants growing there become noticeably weaker, smaller, and more sickly, and the pests and diseases that love that crop settle in to stay. The old gardeners solved this with wonderful, patient simplicity. They simply never grew the same thing in the same place twice. Each year, they moved their crops along to a fresh new bed. Where the heavy, hungry feeders had grown one year, they planted something far gentler the next, and often they followed with clover to restore the soil again. This gave each patch of earth a chance to rest and recover. It quietly balanced the soil again and left the hungry pests and diseases with nothing to find. They called this careful dance the rotation of the crops. It's older than memory, and it still works beautifully today. Just keep a simple note of what grew where last season, then simply move everything gently along each year,
and let your tired soil rest and breathe. The seventh secret ties every single one of the others together. The old gardeners knew their soil was not just lifeless dirt. They understood deep down that it was alive, quietly teeming with countless tiny working creatures, earthworms tunneling, fungi spreading, and microbes beyond counting. This vast, invisible underground crew does almost all of the real work of feeding your plants. The worms loosen the soil and turn waste into rich castings.
The fungi reach far out through the soil and carry water and minerals back to the roots, and the microbes unlock the nutrients that are locked in the earth. Everything the old gardeners did was meant to feed this living crew. The compost, the manure, the mulch, the clover, all of it was food. Feed the life down in the soil, and in turn, that living soil will quietly feed you. It was a partnership, quietly tended and handed down for generations. And here is where many modern habits can quietly go wrong. Harsh chemicals and constant heavy feeding can damage that living soil. And used carelessly over the years, they can slowly weaken the very living crew that helps you most. The old gardeners never sterilized their earth. They nourished it. They trusted the worms and the fungi to do what they do best. So try to treat your own soil as the living, breathing, working thing that it truly is. Feed it gently, cover it kindly, and disturb it as little as you can. Do just that, and an entire unseen army of tiny helpers will quietly work away for you, the very same army that made your grandparents' gardens so rich. We've uncovered 7 forgotten secrets behind that incredible old soil, but the final lesson is the one that ties the whole story together, and it changes how you see that bag of fertilizer forever. Here is the 8th and most important lesson of them all. Our grandparents were not smarter or more gifted than we are. They simply listened patiently to the soil and worked closely, gently alongside it. Every secret we've talked about was once just ordinary common sense. It was simple, patient knowledge, quietly handed down from parent to child for countless ages. They learned to read the soil the way you read a familiar face.
They knew when it was hungry, when it was tired, and when it was healthy and truly well. And then, not so very long ago, everything quietly changed. Bags of cheap, powerful fertilizer arrived in the shops, and they made a tempting promise to every busy gardener. Skip the compost, skip the manure, skip the clover, and skip all of that patient, careful work. Just pour this on, and your plants will grow green overnight. And so, little by little, we quietly set all of those old, patient ways aside. We stopped feeding the soil and started feeding only the plants. And in doing so, we slowly traded a living relationship with the earth for a quick and easy bag. And over the years, we simply forgot the language of the soil. But here is the quietly hopeful part of the whole story. The soil itself has not forgotten a single thing. Every last thing your grandparents quietly knew still works just as well in your own garden today. The worms, the fungi, the clover, and the rich compost are every one of them still here. And that living, closed circle is still here, patiently waiting quietly to be joined once again. And you can begin to rejoin it with one small handful of compost. It was never really a secret at all, and it was never, ever truly lost. It was only waiting, quietly, for someone willing to listen once more. And that, in the end, is what your garden has been quietly trying to tell you all along. So before you reach for that bag again this season, pause for a moment. Ask yourself how your own grandparents might have chosen to feed this very same soil. Start a small compost pile in a corner, or sow a simple patch of clover this very year. Cover your bare beds and let the worms and fungi get to work. Just feed the soil first, and in time, the rich and living soil will surely feed you. If this changed the way you see your garden, subscribe to What the Garden Knows. Every single week, we learn to read one more secret hidden in plain sight. And if you love the creatures that visit your garden, check out Backyard Wildlife Mind. It's where we explore all the wild lives unfolding right outside your window. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, your garden is always speaking.